As Team Affirmative, our side of the house regrets the normalization of cutting off friends and family for ideological differences. So, moving on, the problem in the status quo is that people now are so quick to leave. They don't think, they're so quick to judge. So, what this looks like is a little disagreement. It turns into a whole entire argument, a little fight. It turns into losing your friends. And it also looks like leaving your family because they don't support what you want, things like that. These are the things that happen in the status quo. Now, our side of the house sees this as a problem because people do not think, they just leave. They don't think about maybe what your family has done for you. They don't think about what you have gone through, maybe with your friends. All they think about at the time is the difference that you have in your belief, or maybe politics, maybe in religion, and you're just leaving each other because of this little difference. So we see this as a problem. Now, moving on to our definition for this debate, I will be defining a term, and that is what an ideological difference is. This is basically the difference in beliefs, the difference in politics or moral principles. Like, for example, maybe one person supports Trump and another person doesn't support him. Maybe one person believes in Christianity, or maybe the other person doesn't believe in a religion. These are the type of ideological differences that we're talking about in this debate. So our BOP for this debate is that we have to prove why cutting off people due to ideological differences is very harmful for society. In this debate, I'll have a point of substantive, and that is how normalizing cutting off people completely destroys your form of support. So, Judge, the context that you need to understand is that every single human being needs a form of support. Every single human being needs a form of support. It could be through friends, it could be through family. Humans are beings that need to support each other in order to live and in order to sustain their lives. So, for example, when you were a baby, could you earn money by yourself? When you were still a child, could you feed yourself? When you were still a baby, could you change your own diapers? Of course, you couldn't. No, you couldn't. You needed your family, your parents, your mom, and your dad to support you as you went along, because it's realistically impossible for a human to live life completely on their own. So sometimes someone needs someone to talk to. Sometimes someone needs someone's help. Sometimes someone needs someone's form of support. Humans are sentient beings, and sentient beings require support. Now, the problem with this is that when you cut off people from your life, you are basically cutting off your only form of support, because all human beings need support. Like I said, all you think about are the differences in beliefs you have. Like, for example, if I like girls and my Christian mom does not think it's right because it's her belief, I'm obviously going to be mad. I'm obviously gonna want to leave her because our beliefs are the opposite. She thinks this, I think that. I might think maybe I want to leave her as soon as I grow up. She's so annoying. She doesn't align with my belief. But I'm not really thinking, right? This was the woman who raised me. This was the woman who fed me. This is the woman, and she is the reason that I'm in this world right now. She is the reason that I live right now. So at the end of the day, we are still mother and daughter, and for the rest of our lives we're still going to need support from each other. It's the same with friends. Maybe one friend supports Trump, maybe the other friend doesn't support it. Maybe one friend supports one religion, maybe another friend supports another religion. But at the end of the day, we've been through things together, we've done things together, we have supported each other. Just because of this belief, we should not leave each other. So what's the comparison between opposition side and our side? On opposition, they don't think, they just normalize leaving people like that. They don't think about the things that you've been through. They don't think about what you owe each other because of the support you have given each other. They don't think about what has happened in the past, and just because of maybe some ideological difference, you leave whoever your loved one is. But on our side of the house, we may have disagreements, but we still think, we don't just leave our loved ones like that, because we know we owe each other something. We have supported each other something. So at the end of the day, our side of the house thinks, and opposition does not think enough. So in conclusion, not only am I able to give you a very clear conceptualization of the status quo, I'm also able to give you a strong argument as to why our side of the house should win this debate. So for all these reasons, please give the winning ballot to government. Thank you.
First, we will be starting with some framing. So basically, all comes out, and we will tell you that we frame ideological differences not as like these petty disagreements. Then you immediately cut off this like relationship. It's not a disagreement about like hobbies, sense of fashion, etc., but maybe deeply influential, inherently contradictory disagreements about perhaps justice or morality, these things that influence how specific people perceive the world. So, for example, if you're a random voter who supports Republicans simply because a Republican candidate made a great speech, was a great person, supporting Republicans isn't your ideal because you can easily shift and support Democrats when one of their candidates is like even like gives even a better speech, is even the better person. We believe that ideological differences it basically will be defined as deeply influential belief clashes like religious tolerance, like religious extremism. When one person is forcing an atheist into believing in a religion, so we think it can also look like one person believing strongly in things like I don't know, like predictions, like crystal ball, etc., while the other person is a strong supporter of scientific facts, etc. We think cutting off means directly ending a relationship or removing the importance from a particular relationship. So this would probably look like distancing them or not actively contacting certain people via social media, being distant offline, etc. We think cutting off friends and family for ideological differences doesn't mean that you need to cut off friends and family once you have like any ideological difference. We think it means that it basically just the action of cutting off friends and family when people think that after careful consideration these differences are intolerable, they cut off this difference. We think it's just that like this action is normalized. This can look like a girl distancing their family because like perhaps their family values men over women. It can look like religious people, a religious person like distancing a friend because like he is constantly mocked for irrationality, etc. We think normalizing things means that like everyone believes this, and social media, school, workplaces, etc., will spread the message that cutting off friends and family for ideological differences is justified. It is acceptable. Yeah. Um. Now moving on to our arguments. So, number one is on emotional burnout. So we think normalizing cutting off friends and family is justified and essential. So basically, we think personal agency and happiness is the most important over, like even over the idea of unconditionally preserving these potentially exhausting relationships. So especially in close relationships where ideologies conflict, it's where like the impact is the biggest. So it's easy to have lots of friction between specific members. So having to constantly spend time with other people whose ideas constantly conflict with yours, it basically causes like huge emotional labor. So what's it going to look like in the status quo? It's probably going to like people constantly looking over what they say and do around people that are linked closely to them, which we think is fundamentally harmful and not recreational. So people basically they have to like constantly monitor what they say, what they do. They have to like suppress their own ideas and use neutral language at all times, which we believe it causes the relationship to become exhausting instead of like healthy and good. So like why is this actually so much of an issue that like we want to justify like cutting off the relationship? So like in many cases of ideological conflict, it's often one individual tolerating beliefs of another that the other party would never tolerate in reverse, rather than like both parties actually tolerating each other's ideologies. We think there would be like in many scenarios an unequal burden of tolerance on one specific side. So we think that this is why people should be encouraged to be allowed to have like this action of cutting off this relationship actually justified. So now moving on to comparative. So on our side, when this action is normalized, this action is no longer criticized and people accept it as norm. people are not forced by social pressure into maintaining relationships that are potentially draining to them, and they're not coerced by social pressure into like maintaining these relationships that are not beneficial, not recreational, not beneficial to like both people. So now moving on to our second argument on moral consistency. So we believe that like basically when people are actually interact and speak with people that like um have moral consistency between their actions and beliefs, and when they actually spend time with people whose ideology like coincide with those, like people will feel more confident, and people will like um basically find more like value zones, and like more morally happy. So when people constantly spend time, are like especially we're saying that like in this article, maybe some people are pressured by social pressure into spending time with people whose ideology you find harmful, you find is not true, even if they are not actively discussing it. We believe that like basically people are experiencing like less cognitive dissonance, and basically like we think this will like turn into moral fatigue, um, etc. So we're not saying basically that people like just randomly like ghosting other people and randomly cutting off the relationship is justified. We just think that like the action of um actually distancing someone else because of ideological conflict is justified and acceptable, um like specifically in cases where um one specific party or both parties believe that the relationship is draining, but they are forced to like maintain the relationship through like social pressure, like through like widely accepted beliefs and norms, etc. So we believe that like all in all, based on these two arguments, yeah, we believe that justifying um we don't regret the normalization of cutting off friends and families for ideological differences.
My speech, I will have a one substantive argument, but before I move on towards that, I would first like to rebut the points made by the opposing team. Now, firstly, onto my rebuttals. The opposing team has said that ideological differences is going to be a big contradiction in your worldview, which is why it should be tolerated that if we just cut off someone who has a different worldview than us. And they've also said that after careful consideration, that these differences are intolerable, then we would cut them off. They also said that they believe in individual agency and that in the status quo, people are encouraged to stay in their relationship, like socially, even though it's mentally exhausting or they have a lot of differences like that. So firstly, against when they said ideological differences is going to be like a big contradiction in your worldview, yes, ideological differences is a really big contradiction in your worldview. We agree with that. However, instead of saying that this is a bad thing, we say that this is something that is good, because the thing is, inside of modern day democracy, democracy thrives through people debating. Democracy thrives through people actually quarreling with each other, which is why we believe that this difference is necessary in creating a stable democracy. Because if people debate with each other, then eventually society is going to reach a point where everyone is more open-minded towards other worldviews. So there's not a lot there. Because if everyone in society is close-minded, then obviously they're not going to be open to different worldviews, and there's going to be a big stagnation within society. And we believe that this stagnation is something very necessary that we have to avoid at all costs within our current society. We've also mentioned that after careful consideration that these differences are intolerable, then we are going to cut them off. However, the motion explicitly states that we are normalizing this behavior, which means that inside of society, socially, it's going to be encouraged or validated to actually cut these people off, which means that maybe there's going to be more social pressures to cut them off. So it's not going to have careful consideration in the first place. So we believe that's another reason why we stand with this motion. You've also said that we believe in individual agency and that in the status quo, people are encouraged to stay in their relationship socially. However, in the status quo, people are not actually encouraged to stay in their relationship anyways. It is simply not true and just an assumption. There's a lot of people who encourage you to leave your relationship with someone if they actually have opposing worldviews with you. There are a lot of people who encourage you to do that, who encourage you to cut these people off if they disagree with you or something, or if they have a big argument with you. And we believe that this is something extremely harmful inside of modern society, as it creates a trend of close-mindedness, which again, we want to avoid inside a society at all costs. And this is something really important that should be addressed throughout the whole debate. Now, against when you said that opposing this motion supports individual agency, think about it. The person that you are cutting off never had the agency for you, never had the agency to stop you from cutting them off. If you cut someone off, then you're destroying their agency because they still want to talk to you. They still want to be friends with you. However, you're destroying their agency to do that simply by opposing this motion. Individuals should be allowed to do whatever they want. Yes. However, we're not illegalizing this anyways. If you think that it's bad enough, then yes, you can leave. We support you having your own individual agency, but we do not want to normalize that because normalizing implies that we are encouraging it, that we are validating it, if even though it might not actually be in a stage where it's valid or necessary to take this sort of action against that individual. Now,
POI.
yes, I'll take your POI.
So can you clarify on what no normalizing will actually kind of look like?
What when we to clarify what normalizing actually looks like, when we're normalizing something, usually means that we're encouraging it
I'm
for
sorry.
other
I'm so
people to
sorry.
do it, or if we're validating it.
I'm so sorry to
Sorry,
interrupt. I meant,
yes.
I'm sorry. I asked like what would not normalizing look like? I'm so sorry for
Oh, what
interrupting,
would
but
not normalizing look like? Which means that we're not actively encouraging it inside of modern society. We're not like posting videos telling people to do it, and we're not sort of like validating it in like a really big sort of way. We're just saying that you can do that, but we're not encouraging you to do that. That's what not normalizing is. But normalizing means that we're encouraging them and we're validating them. That's basically it. And that's what we are against. And now, moving on towards my substantive argument, is that this normalization will eventually create echo chambers inside of society. When we push people away for ideological reasons, we're essentially forming a circle filled with only those who share the same view as us. The trend of pushing away people for ideological differences amplifies the creation of echo chambers where people will say yes to everything you say and agree with what you say. This halts societal progress as echo chambers make us think that we are already correct when we may not be, simply because the people around us is telling us that we are correct. Proposition encourages the debate between communities because we don't normalize people cutting other people off simply because of ideological differences. We want people to debate as we believe that this is crucial inside of society, crucial inside of democracy, inside of community, in order to make an even better democracy, even better community in the future through said debate. At the very least, under our side, we can further prevent the creation of these echo chambers because we're not encouraging people to cut others off simply because of ideological differences. We don't want people to separate over ideological differences. Remember that these people are still your friends, are still your family, still close to you and your life, and we find it illogical to push them away because of these ideological differences. The differences inside a society is what forms a true democracy, and a family member or a friend is the best way to become open to new ideas, to become introduced towards new ideas, because you're already comfortable with this person. And if people become more open to new ideas, then democracy is going to prosper because then society will progress even faster, we progress even further, and there's going to be a reduction of close-mindedness because people are more encouraged to, because under our side of the house, when people actually want to stay with others, even though they might share ideological differences, at the very least, they become more open-minded towards this ideology that their friend shares because it's from their friend. And eventually, they might see the good stuff instead of only the bad stuff inside of this ideology. And that is one of the key things to creating a prosperous democracy, which is why we support this motion right now. So please give the winning ballot towards the proposition team if you truly want to create a better, more democratic society.
first of all, going on to rebutting the opening government. Number one, they talk about how everybody in society needs social connections because it is not realistic for people to live on their own because basically, like quoting them, humans are sentient beings. But on our side, Judge, some people can face some people can face consistent conflicts that undermine their entire mental state. How is that actually the kind of support that we are talking about? If support is only staying in a relationship saying that, oh, you are my friend, only acknowledging that fact, we don't think that that support is inherent and is beneficial for the person as a whole. Secondly, they talk about how breaking up relationships with someone you have a deep bond with is usually very irrational. They give the example of, for example, you breaking up with your mother simply because you have a small disagreement about, let's say, your sexual state, and then you breaking up with your mother who loves you very much. However, a couple of clarifications that my partner has already clearly talked about at the start. Number one, cutting off friends and family for ideological differences doesn't mean that you need to cut off friends and families once you have an ideological difference. It means that you can cut off friends and family when you think, usually after careful consideration, that these differences are intolerable for you. But secondly, normalizing in this case means that people think, like social media, for example, cutting off friends and family for ideological differences is acceptable, not good, as the opponent is framing it, Judge. You cannot simply take that because notice the wording is normalized instead of glorify, which is what our opponents are kind of talking about. Thus, we think that people are not very likely to break up with somebody simply because of minor reasons or irrationally. They often consider, like, will I get lonely if I break up? Is it actually true that I will gain more from breaking up than, for example, stay in this relationship? If they still choose to do so and you think it is irrational, we believe that you do not actually have the power to judge that because we think that the person in this case is the only one who's affected, and thus there must be some justifiable reason for them to do so. But thirdly, they talk about how democracy actually thrives when people like disagreeing. So this state of like people disagreeing with each other is helpful to create a democratic society, leading to everybody having like open worldviews. However, they basically are saying that you must stay with friends with like everybody. You must stay with your family no matter what they believe for democracy in order to thrive. Thus, we believe that in this case, we are kind of forcing people to just endanger their own safety,
Siyuan,
normalize the kind of, yes?
we already said if something is actually rational and not like irrational, which I already stated inside of my speech, then we're not then yes, we support that because that's your own agency. But if you're like leaving irrationally, which can happen, then that's what we are against inside of this motion.
Okay, I think you completely ignored my rebuttals by first of all saying that the motion doesn't say you need to leave somebody once you have an ideological difference. It just says that leaving because an ideological difference is bad and you think it's intolerable is acceptable. You completely ignored that. But also, we have already talked about how even if, for example, you think it is irrational, there's always going to be some justifiable reason for the person to leave because they are the only ones who are going to be affected by leaving, except for like the other person who is leaving. So like he or she doesn't have to do anything to prove to society, to prove to us who are debating here, because he is the only one, or he or she is the only one who is affected. There must be some reason because he won't want to, for example, ensure that he will be able to have loneliness. That is just not a very plausible, for example, mechanism. But also they talk about, and moving on, relating to the fact about like echo chambers, because everybody around you tells you that what you do is always right, relating to democracy, for example. However, echo chambers, we absolutely agree they're not great, but they happen when you avoid things like all disagreement. But we think we are talking about rejecting ideologies that basically are attacking things like the way you view your world and human dignity. You can still do things like read different news, debate with strangers, like what we're doing right now, basically, and have civil arguments with people who respect you. For example, we are debating now about emotion, but I do not have such an ideological difference so much, for example, that I am going to hate you, for example, that I'm going to hate you simply, I hate you as a person simply because you have this stance. We believe that is not what you are talking about. That is not what the motion is talking about. And thus, we believe that echo chambers are not going to be able to exist because of that. But secondly, we say that it is just practically impossible to find a person in society who is always going to agree with everything you say. There will always be disagreements. This could be things about like, for example, your hobbies, the way or whether or not you think something is more important than others. For example, education is more important than taking a job. These are not ideological views that you depend on just to survive, like the basis of your thinking. thinking, things like religion, we think that these can still exist as is already clearly defined but at the start of our speech and also at the start of your speech. But finally, they talk about there will be no careful consideration before breaking up. I believe I have already kind of rebutted that by saying that the stakeholder is only the one who's breaking up. But moving on to extension. So my partner talked briefly about how people need to have moral consistency. I would like to extend on that by telling you how it leads to moral fatigue. We think that human beings, they seek consistency between their actions and beliefs because when you spend time with someone whose ideology you find harmful, even if they're not, for example, actively discussing it, you experience a low-grade form of cognitive dissonance because you ask yourself, well, why am I talking and laughing with somebody who supports policies that, for example, hurt people that I really love? Or why am I just playing with somebody who denies basic facts about justice or science that are absolutely true, like from their perspective in this case? Over time, we believe that this dissonance accumulates into moral fatigue because you believe that, for example, people around you, and in this case, not everybody, we're not talking about everybody, but somebody that you value very much, your friends and families, are actively and constantly, for example, disagreeing with you. You grow tired of compromising your own integrity and your own beliefs just to keep this so-called peace on the outside. And that is why we think it pushes people to, for example, leaving a relationship, cutting out a relationship due to that dissonance and moral fatigue that thrives in all of these, for example, having to maintain this kind of peace. But next, moving on to a best case and worst case scenario way. So let's look at our worst case scenario. In our worst case scenario, people are going to, for example, leave basically once they have an ideological difference. Let's say they leave irrationally. Let's just say, and in our best case scenario, basically, which they didn't target, is basically like everybody's going to leave rationally. They have a justifiable reason. But even in our worst case scenario, in which, for example, people are going to leave for like all of these reasons, they're going to leave somebody just because they are going to, let's say, have a difference, we think that number one, they will be able to realize that society doesn't have people that are always going to agree with everything they say. We believe they will soon realize that different
POI.
differences, sorry, it's over time. Ideological differences are sometimes acceptable, justifiable, or at least small minor differences or rational differences, like you said on your side, are acceptable. But secondly, we believe that even if they are going to go into a circle in which, for example, everybody is going to agree with what they say, we still think that this is better for their mental health and thus is better for the well-being of society as a whole because they're able to not have conflicts, not have hate, not have extremism, and not stay in a relationship that hurts them very deeply. And for all these reasons, we're so proud to oppose.
I'll firstly go on to my extension. As normalizing the cutting off of friends and family over ideological differences erodes essential personal support systems, like my prime minister said, and making individuals more vulnerable, less resilient, and worse off compared to a world where relationships are preserved despite disagreements. Now moving on to 3 layers of analysis. Humans depend on social support, and all individuals require emotional, social, and sometimes practical support from others to function effectively. This is highly likely because humans are inherently social beings, like my prime minister said again. Relationships provide assistance in times of stress, advice during decision-making moments, and emotional stability during challenges. No individual operates entirely independently in real life, and every single individual has support systems in their life. Moving on to my second layer, normalization changes how people respond to conflict. When society normalizes cutting off others over ideological differences, individuals begin to perceive disagreements as sufficient justification to end relationships. This is likely because social norms strongly influences behaviors. When a behavior is seen as acceptable, it incentivizes people to feel less hesitation in adopting it, even in situations where a relationship previously would have been preserved. As a result, even small agreements or minor ideological differences can escalate into full relationship breakdowns because individuals no longer feel obligated to maintain ties once disagreement appears. Now moving on to impacting. Firstly, individuals in the normalized world are more likely to experience isolation or reduce emotional support because relationships are more easily broken. This is likely because once cutting off becomes socially acceptable and becomes a norm, people do not need strong justification to end relationships, even in minor conflicts. Secondly, without consistent support systems, individuals are less able to cope with personal, academic, or life challenges. This is likely, again, because social support plays a key role in mental and emotional resilience, having people to actually rely on significantly improves one's ability to manage stress and setbacks. Sorry. Now, last layer, in the normalized cut-off world, individuals are systematically less supported, more isolated, and more vulnerable over time. In contrast, in a world where ideological differences do not justify severing relationships, individuals retain their support system despite disagreements. This ensures that even when conflict arises, people still have access to help, guidance, and emotional stability. Now move on to my second extension. Second extension, when normalizing cutting off of friends and family over ideological differences increases polarization and entrenches extreme views, whereas discouraging such behavior promotes moderation and reduces societal division. Now moving on to three layers of analysis. Firstly, people form belief not only through independent reasoning and through what they understand, but also through interaction with trusted individuals or individuals with more life experience who have lived longer than them. This is highly likely because humans are social beings, again, like I said, who rely on feedback and discussion within relationships to evaluate and refine their views, not just through their own independent and isolated thinking. Secondly, when relationships depend on ideological agreement, individuals are incentivized to avoid engaging with opposing perspectives to protect their social ties. This is likely, again, because the cost of disagreements becomes higher. People risk losing relationships, so they rationally choose environments where their views are not challenged. Thirdly, as individuals cluster into ideologically similar groups, they are repeatedly exposed only to reinforcing viewpoints, making them not open-minded and instead having a fixed mindset, thinking that their mindset is the best and they should just follow it. This likely again because social networks naturally becomes more homogeneous when people self-select into like-minded groups without exposure to counter arguments. There are fewer corrective pressures, allowing beliefs to become more extreme and entrenched over time. Now moving on to the impacting, individuals become less
You are.
exposed. No, thank you. Becomes less exposed to opposing viewpoints, resulting in narrow statistics, and because of their social circles no longer include people challenging their beliefs. And lastly, in the long run, increased polarization leads to greater hostility, reduced empathy, and more difficulty in resolving disagreements and actually fixing relationships peacefully. This is likely again because extreme and isolated groups are less willing to compromise or understand opposing views. In contrast, in a world where relationships persist in our world across ideological differences, regular exposure to diverse perspectives moderates beliefs and reduces extremity. Therefore, the normalized cut-off world predictably produces a more divide and conflict-prone society. Now moving on to the rebuttal. While the proposition argues that cutting off relationships over differing beliefs is justified for emotional well-being and personal agency, we must weigh the broader consequences of normalizing such behavior. Firstly, although individuals may gain short-term emotional release, the wider societal impact is far more significant. The opposition may argue that individuals will only cut off relationship after careful consideration and not immediately upon disagreement. However,
You
still
are.
no, thank you. However, this still does not resolve the core issue, which is normalizing distancing over differences. Still encourages people to ultimately disengage rather than work through disagreements. Over time, if this mindset is accepted, it leads to an increased social fragmentation, where communities become divided into echo chambers where individuals only interact with like-minded people. This reduces exposure to diverse perspectives and weakens social cohesion. So even with careful consideration, the end result is still exclusion based on differences which harm society at large more than it benefits individuals. For all these reasons, I'd like to propose.
I think throughout this debate, we have gotten like lots of examples of what it looks like when you leave or what like normalization looks like in the status quo. But I don't think many of them have explained the impacts of what happens in the long term. 2 points in this speech. Firstly, on comparing the different types of friendship, and secondly, comparing and how it benefits the children or friends that on the status quo had to choose sides between like these beliefs. Firstly, on friendships, I believe there's like two types of friendship in the status quo. Firstly, friendships you have with people that have core beliefs. I think OO has like brought out some points in this. They have said that if you have friendships with these people, you have the same morals, you have the same mindset, and I agree with all this. But I think the best benefit you're able to get with friendships with people that have core belief is that the ultimate benefit is that you both help each other. You both make decisions that you cohesively decide that are good. You're both able to agree on something or both able to work together on something. That means you get mutual benefits on both sides. I think this is what OO has missed out on, that you get benefits from both sides of the party, but both sides of the party are able to mutually benefit from each other, are both able to grow together. Because if you look at the comparative, or what the status quo looks like, it looks like one party or one person having to change themselves or change their beliefs or decisions to fit into what other people think. It looks like changing what religion you are or changing what you actually want to go to do, like such as what religion you want to pursue or who you genuinely want to vote for your parents, for your friends, etc. But on our side, you're both able to help each other, you're able to support the decision, and you're able to have like this feeling of being able to like feel good. You're able to know that you made the right decision with people that actually support you. Secondly, what other friendships that has not been brought out of debate? I think no one has talked about what about the friendships that you have between people of different beliefs. I believe that these friendships will still exist in the status quo. It's just that on our side in the status quo is that you have these genuine friendships. Because if right now, even when it is normalized that you can leave like your friends if they have different beliefs, and if you still remain friends with this, that means you have a genuine friendship where you actually believe, even if they have different core beliefs, you believe that they're doing the right thing for them, and you can still have a genuine friendship. The comparative on their side of what is happening right now is that many of these friendships with people of different beliefs are probably forced. It's probably meaning like, oh, I can't leave this friendship, meaning that means I have to like force myself into agreeing with them or force myself into pretending to like the decisions, which I believe are incorrect. But on our side, instead you get someone that even if you don't believe your core beliefs, you still get someone that actually supports you. They might give you some opinions or guidance why you think, oh, this might be wrong, but they still genuinely support you, are honest to you on why they think it might benefit you in the long run, or things that you get. And this means that on firstly we are able to like dissolve this the argument on OG on how like they aren't having friendships and how like people need friendships. Because on our side you actually have like friendships, and you actually have even more genuine friendships on our side, because you have friends that actually believe what you're doing is right, and you have friends that are supporting you the whole entire way. Second point in this speech is how people no longer have to choose sides. Why is this? It's because an example of this is when you're grown up or you're a child that enters a family with a mother and father that have different beliefs. This no longer happens. It's because when you have friends that are genuine, you probably have people that don't force you into having to choose sides. You have people that have the same beliefs. So as a child, you no longer have to choose sides. As a friend, you no longer have to choose sides between which decision is right or wrong, or who is right or wrong. Which means on our side, we have people or friends or children that no longer have to make such hard decisions. What we also get is that when people are not like having to choose so forcefully between two people, or like if they choose like to have this belief, they're supporting someone, like they're supporting their mother, but then they're like abandoning their father. Instead, when they are able to be left with a blank slate on our side, it looks like you're able to more clearly think of what you genuinely want instead of what like your either parent wants or what either friend wants. You're able to actually consider what you reasonably want, which means on our side, instead of having an echo chamber like the government has been like pushing, we actually get decisions that are made much better because you have friends that support whatever decision you make, and you also have no one giving you opinions that might like defer what like giving you suggestions that might defer your opinions, or giving you things that might corrupt your thoughts. And what do we get from this is that we get people that are like more civil. You get genuinely like better friendships. You get people making much genuinely better decisions. Are there any POIs from opening government? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No. So now I'm going to continue on why these two arguments are so important. I believe the reason why we win against the OG is that the main push is how you like destroy like your most support. You don't get as much support on your side, and because you don't like lose lots of these support and you lose lots of these things, it's really bad for you. As I've already explained, you get much better friendships because you are surrounded by people who are like-minded, but you're also surrounded by people that benefit you mutually, that means OG is out of this debate. And now why do we win again? And why do we win against our opening? I believe that even though opening has given us many points on why it might like relieve you of emotional burnout, or it might not give you like social pressure, I don't think they actually explain how it helps both sides, not just the individual as itself, how you also help the community or others surrounding you, and how you like help everyone in general on the long run. And I think what closing government tries to bring us is that how there's like going to be like an echo chamber in this debate, and how lots of your decisions are going to be like skewed because you're only surrounded by people which are like having the same opinions as you. But I believe that when you're surrounded by people that have the same opinions as you, it's actually much better than if you're surrounded by people who are constantly having like disagreements with each other. Because if you have like parents, for example, that are consistently telling you this religion is better than this one, or this religion is better than this one, you're actually not caring about like the core values of which religion you're choosing. You're just upset that you're just confused on who you're going to upset because you're like scared that you might like upset one of your parents or etc. But on our side, instead, when you're left with a blank slate, or you're put in somewhere where everyone believes in certain core values, you're not going to be like constantly brainwashed, well, something's better than another. Instead, you're just left with a blank slate where you're able to work on, and which is much better than the comparative. And because of those reasons above, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
Let's start on the two main clashes in today's debate, in which I'll be using to frame out and rebut points brought by the opposition team. Firstly, on which side benefits the mental health of a person. Both sides have both agreed that prioritizing the mental health of the individual itself is actually important and does play a vital role in today's debate. And government has brought to you arguments on how cutting off people just solely due to their ideological beliefs will harm you in a way because it impacts your support system and it cuts off people with actual significance towards you. While opposition has brought forward that being in a relationship with someone that doesn't agree with you constantly will be mentally draining and it will impact your mental health negatively. So let's break the deadlock here and bring to you what actually benefits someone in the long term. We agree that it is going to be detrimental towards your mental health if you're stuck in a relationship with somebody that has different beliefs from you. But we see that there's been a very, very strong assumption on opposition side that people will carry out their beliefs extremely strongly. And we see that they failed to mechanize on how my strong beliefs are going to impact how I treat someone else. And they haven't provided very, very exact examples of how it's going to directly factor into my relationship with somebody else. We see that the only strong example that they've brought to us is saying that someone constantly disagrees with you, someone carries out their beliefs very strongly. But we see that this isn't the most common example you can get. Instead, in the status quo we see where people have different beliefs, it doesn't apply to everyone where they just go out there and force their beliefs onto you. We don't see that they can claim that somehow they can claim this benefit of people not going to do it about how it's not going to happen that commonly, because we see that in the motion today, it's normalization. That means society agrees and accepts it as something that is common, and it is going to happen commonly on their side. So about the point about mental health, we see that because they have failed to provide exact mechanization on what it looks like when I'm trying to interact with someone with different beliefs, we see that the point about being in a mentally draining relationship isn't exclusively on their side. Because like the previous speakers have said, in the status quo today, we don't force people to be in mentally draining relationships at all. Instead, we encourage the opposite. We don't see how by cutting off people of different beliefs, go ahead.
People aren't able to get out of these mentally draining relationships because it is not normalized for them to leave. So when they are seen leaving, they get lots of hate or backlash from doing this. Explain how this is not true on your side.
We don't see how it's going to be judged so significantly when we judge it, when we're thinking about it based on, let's say it's an individual itself. We don't see there any moral obligation to stay stuck in such a mentally draining relationship, because we see clearly people can prioritize their mental health over beliefs of others. We see that similarly, people in which we've already stated know that their mental well-being is something that's way more important than what society is going to bring to you. But there are still people that are, yes, we agree that there are still people subject to such public beliefs and scrutinization. However, moving back to the point, no, thank you. Moving back to the point about people mental health being detrimental. We see that similarly, there isn't anything that is preventing them from leaving this in the first place. We see that people staying in a relationship in itself is an obligation. We see that people stay with each other and respect each other's views because we have a moral obligation to do so. So we don't see how that point about being in a mentally draining thing is like so bad, because like we've already impacted before, people in society will understand if you provide concrete examples. Not just, I don't leave them just because they don't believe in things like it, but because it impacts the way they treat me and it impacts the way the relationship acts on our side. But in conclusion, we see that benefiting the mental health of a person in the long term, having a good support system is still far more important than whatever they bring to us about somehow it is mentally draining, and thus it will be detrimental towards the person. We both agree that prioritizing personal well-being is something that both sides have like placed importance on, but we see the way that we will deal with cutting off people of different ideologies is something that separates us. So my speaker has brought forth about how such behavior will impact society as a whole. And this is extremely important and separates us from the opening government, because so far no one has provided concrete analysis on how it is beyond just the individual impact that someone gets when they cut off somebody of different beliefs. He's brought to you things like how it branches out from an individual itself, it branches to the people affected when you cut them off, how they also go through similar harms as you do, which brings a much larger scale of impact when you think about it. When you cut off your relationship with somebody else, they similarly lose one part of the support system, they similarly receive all the harms that you do. So as a whole, we see that, no thank you, we see that benefits to a mental health of a person, it really depends on like the people they're with. We don't see how being in a relationship with someone of different belief is going to be directly really mentally draining. We don't see, they haven't provided any definition on how every single person that has a strong belief is going to carry it out strongly. So we don't see that the point about being in a mentally draining relationship actually stands. They have failed to tell us how people are going to stand against normalization, because in a society where this is so encouraged, is not encouraged, so normalized, and people accept it so much, people are more likely to be judged for it when they don't do it instead. So for example, someone who chooses to go ahead and follow the public and, for example, breaking up in a relationship with somebody else with a different belief is less likely to be held accountable than somebody who is trying to forge a healthy relationship with somebody else of different beliefs. We see that people are more subject to public pressure on their side, and so they cannot claim that immediate benefit that somehow people are going to find their way to make friends with others, because they've agreed that public pressure is something that's really major and is going to influence somebody on the decisions they make. So as a whole, we bring that their side doesn't stand with any of their arguments. They've brought a lot of one-liners, they haven't provided a lot of analysis, and thus we take today's debate home.
We believe that when we're not normalizing cutting off friends and families for ideological differences, that instead these people are able to form deeper relationships, and it's better for everyone in the party, not just the one person who's leaving or the person who's getting their friend left away from them. So in this debate, I've identified 2 points of clash. So the first one is, how does this impact like the person who's like leaving and cutting themselves off from these relationships? Well, so our main point under this clash as closing opposition was that these people have formed more genuine friendships, which makes them feel happier, and without being crowded by opposing ideological beliefs, by instead observing them from a distance, this actually increases the likelihood that you'll be more open-minded to these beliefs, which is better for in terms of your relationships, and it's better in terms of your opinions on these ideological beliefs and the world as a whole. So opening government said that humans need support and company because like we're essentially sentient beings. And however, we say that we're not actually cutting off these relationships, we're actually just changing these relationships. We're switching these relationships from person A to person B, and in fact making this switch to person B is actually better for the person, because what this means is that now you have a person who has the same values as you, who has similar religions to you, and because ideological beliefs are such deep and such core beliefs you have, having someone who opposes with these beliefs would actually mean that your friendship in the first place probably wasn't that genuine. So Our opening government also said that these people aren't going to think before they leave these relationships. However, these relationships don't simply mean nothing to them. Of course, they do think. They probably put a fair amount of care and consideration into it. But because these relationships aren't as significant or as deep as someone who you had a relationship with, who you have similar ideological beliefs to, we think that these relationships are worth leaving. It's worth leaving to find someone who has similar beliefs with you, because that means the connections that you forge will instead be stronger. So opening opposition said that ideological differences are big, which we agree with. However, they are emphasizing on the agency and happiness, as well as the moral consistency and moral fatigue of the person itself. However, we believe that the main reason that you should be leaving these relationships isn't only for the benefit on yourself, it's also for the benefit for the other party. We believe that there's a benefit for everyone when you're forming more genuine relationships, as I'll expand on in my next clash. So, opening government also mentions that friends and families are the best way to be exposed to new ideas. However, we instead think that friends and families are the people you're closest to, right? These are the people you rely on. These are the sort of people you like trust with your like secrets. These are sort of people that you need to surround you and support you. And if you're different from such a deep moral basis, we think that the support that they're able to give isn't as deep and isn't as like wholesome as it should be. As Instead, if it was a person with similar moral beliefs as yourself. And because you want these relationships to be meaningful, it's better to simply observe these different ideological beliefs from a distance and instead surround yourself with people who have similar ideological beliefs to yourself, because that way you think in a similar way and you're able to rely on them and you're able to change your opinion if you want to from a distance, so it's more comfortable for yourself. So what the government needed to have proved was one of two things. Either had these ideological differences aren't significant enough to be harming the person in this relationship, which they didn't prove, because these ideological differences are fundamentally really big things about religions and values, and these are simply things that are like really big. You can't ignore them. Like being friends with someone who's like has a completely different values as you will mean that they talk different, they think different, you react to situations different. So this is too big, so hence they cannot prove this. The second thing they had to prove is how it is big enough that you're willing to change. But however, because we think that it is so big, it's not something that's easy for someone to change, nor it is something that someone's willing to compromise just to stay friends with someone. So we think that it's better that they're instead changing, growing out of these friendships, and like viewing these different ideological beliefs at like a timing and like at a distance that suits them. And we differ from opening opposition because our impacts are focused on everyone with a larger scale, whereas they focus on like the moral fatigue and agency for the one person, because we believe that genuine relationships affect more people for a greater cause. So the second point of clash is, how does this affect the people they're leaving? So like their friends and family. So basically, closing governments is like emphasizing that we're not illegalizing it. You can still leave if it's bad enough. However, we believe that these basically there's not much different. Not normalizing it basically means that people will be staying in these superficial relationships, because when they do cut off, they'll be judged, they'll get backlash, they'll get hate, and they're willing to stay in these like superficial relationships just to avoid this backlash. However, we think that this is not good. We think that they shouldn't be keeping themselves in this mentally draining a relationship. We think that they should be exploring other people. They should be seeing other people who have similar beliefs as them, so they can feel more connected. And we think that if they're going to get backlash and hate from doing this, they're not likely to do this. So we think that it has to be normalized. It has to be normalized so they're actually willing to take this risk, so they're actually willing to go do this, and they're actually willing to put themselves in a better and more deeper relationships that's not both better for them and is better for the other party. So our main point under this clash is that when you get more genuine friendships formed, the other party also gets more happiness and support, and you as well as them doesn't have to choose between a black and white scenario, because cutting off and distancing allows for more gray areas. It allows for more it allows for you to be neutral, and it allows for you to think from that blank slate sort of perspective. So government also mentioned that quarreling and debating about differences is good because it's better for democracy. However, we think that because ideological differences are something that's what a person's like core values and what they are built on, we think that actually this quarreling won't be doing anything, because these beliefs are simply too deep. Instead, what it will be doing is it will be forcing you to judge these other beliefs, these other religions. It will be forcing you to think further that they're wrong, that they're not right, that it doesn't even make sense, because these beliefs are so deep that you're not willing to change it. So, for example, if you have an example of what these like sort of deep values would look like is, if you have a friendship where one person believes, oh, honesty is better than like telling like small white lies to make the other person better, when the other person is like hearing these
honest comments, they always be seeing this as hurtful, not honest. So for example, if it said like, oh, I don't like this dress that you're wearing, as they simply mean it to be honest and they mean it as like feedback or like constructive, this other person will see it as hurtful. And we think that simply this relationship wouldn't even have gone that far because of how hurtful it was, because that both parties are misunderstanding each other, because these ideological beliefs make it really difficult for them to change as a person. So we actually think that basically these people are leaving because of a big difference that we have and big difference that they have. And we think that this is worth it because they need to be putting themselves into relationships where other people share the same core values as them, because this will mean that they're getting more out of the relationship, that they're getting more support, that the other person is getting more support and more happiness. And it means that the relationships that we're forming is able to be deeper. These relationships are able to be stronger, and these relationships aren't so superficial. So at the end of this clash, you should believe that both parties, which is a large scale because it affects everyone in society who like has an ideological belief, which is basically everyone, are benefited, because when you're friends with people who have the same like ideological beliefs as you, which means that you're able to form like deeper and more supportive relationships, which is better for you and the other party. And that's why you should put your vote towards opposition. Thank you.